start. Behalasocha, third portion of the book of Numbers, third portion of the fourth book. So where we are in the story is that the Jewish people are just about ready in this week's Parsha to move toward entering the land of Israel. At this point, they're supposed to go into the land of Israel in a very short period of time. We know the end of the story, so we know that they were delayed for 40 years. But at this point, everything is still very optimistic. I think if you look in this Parsha, you see the beginning of the end. In other words, you see the beginning of the downfall, the beginning of the challenges that eventually lead to the sin of the spies, which we'll read about next week, eventually lead to the Jewish people being delayed. But at the beginning of the Parsha, at least, we start with very optimistic. Everything seems so perfect. And at the end of the Parsha, toward the middle of the Parsha, things start turning very bad very quickly. It's almost surprising how quick the breakdown occurs. So that's something we want to think about, probably very insightful to human experience in general, how the breakdown happens so fast. So where are we starting? We're starting at the point where the Jewish people have been at Sinai for more than a year, about a year and a month. And this past year, they received the Torah. They received the first set of tablets. They received the second set of tablets after the sin and the forgiveness. And then God told them to build a Mishkan, to build the tabernacle. They spent a few months building the tabernacle, building the Mishkan. They experienced the great joy of the inauguration of the tabernacle, which happened on the 1st of Nisan, almost a year since they came to Sinai. And the divine presence dwelled in the tabernacle. Wonderful. We also read how the Jewish people, in this book we read about at the beginning of the fourth book, how the people camped around the tabernacle. And then finally, at the end of last week's Parsha, last week's portion, we read about the gifts that the leaders of each tribe donated at the day of the temple's inauguration. God said, instead of having one-day celebration, we'll have 10-day celebration. We'll have a 12-day celebration. And every day, another leader will offer their offering. So you had a 12-day celebration, and that's where last week's Parsha concludes. So we're basically, we got the Torah, we built the home for God, we figured out how to camp around the temple in an organized way instead of everybody fighting where they should sit and where they should park. Everybody has their designated place. Every tribe has their place where they feel comfortable. And now we're ready to proceed toward Israel. Everything seems so perfect. And like I alluded to earlier, the debacle happens in this week's Parsha. The beginning of the downfall happens in this Parsha. So it starts very positive. In the middle, it becomes very negative. And toward the end, it's not so clear what it is. So we'll have to figure out what's the Torah really trying to tell us with all these stories. And what is the Torah telling us about ourselves in all these stories? So the journey begins. The story starts with Behalasocha Tanerot. God, the portion starts. If you have the book, you could look at Numbers chapter 8, but you don't need to read the book. The opening mitzvah is God tells Moshe to tell Aaron to light the menorah. The menorah, we know what a menorah is. There was a menorah in the temple, and Aaron lit the menorah twice a day, in the morning and at night. Now, the question, of course, is why are we talking about the menorah? This seems completely out of place. The commandment about the menorah appears earlier in the Torah, twice already. We read about all the specific service in the temple, including the menorah. So why is it reiterated here? It's very strange why it's reiterated here. So I'm going to begin with Rashi's interpretation, and then we'll try to see what that really means. The Rashi's interpretation is that Aaron, the Torah just finished dedicating many verses to the 12 gifts of the 12 leaders of the tribes. Every leader of every tribe brought a gift on the day of the inauguration of the altar. And the Torah spends a lot of space, a lot of verses, a lot of words describing those gifts. Says Rashi, quoting the Medrash, that Aaron sees these gifts and Aaron feels bad. Chol shadaita, he's weak. In other words, he feels bad. Why does he feel bad? He feels bad because his tribe was not part of those gifts. Neither he nor his tribe. Aaron is from the tribe of Levi, and the Levites did not offer this gift. So Aaron feels left out. There's excitement and everybody's participating except for him, so he feels bad. That's what Rashi says. So therefore, Hashem reiterates to Moshe, tell Aaron to light the menorah. Why? Because remind him that he lights the menorah. What does that help? It says, Rashi continues, quoting the Medrash, he tells Aaron, your portion is greater than their portion. In other words, all the other tribes, even though they brought wonderful and beautiful gifts, but your portion, the fact that you kindle the menorah on a daily basis, that is greater than the gifts of the whole. That's what Rashi says. So if you read this literally, Aaron feels bad. Aaron says, oh, how come I'm not participating? It's not fair. And God says, don't worry, you also do other things. That's what my mother tells me. I'm one of 7 boys, one of 10 children. And when somebody does something, she says, don't worry, you did something else. It's okay. You didn't get this opportunity, you'll get a different opportunity. That's what it seems like is happening here. Aaron is just like jealous. And God is saying, don't worry, you have something else. So be happy with your lives. That's the simple interpretation. Of course, it's much deeper than that. And all the commentaries point out that there's many layers of meaning to this discussion of Aaron feeling bad. So I'm just going to offer 1 or 2 of them, and then we get to the excitement, to the drama of the story. So I don't want to spend too much time here. Okay, what is really happening here? So Aaron does the service in the temple on a consistent basis. Every day, Aaron does the service in the temple. The priests serve in the temple every day. So that's continuous. Then you have the leaders of the tribes. They don't offer the gifts on a continuous basis. They offer the gifts at the inauguration. What does the inauguration mean? Inauguration means in the beginning. In the beginning, there's a great excitement. So the first time that the temple sort of opened for business, the leaders of the tribes show up and they bring a gift. And of course, they're full of excitement because it's very easy to be excited in the beginning. It's like the honeymoon. It's very easy to be excited on your honeymoon. So Aaron feels bad. Why does Aaron feel bad? Aaron feels bad, and Aaron says that, I'm not sure. I like this energy. I love the energy of the priests. I love the energy of the leaders of the tribes. Look how passionate they are. Look how excited they are when they see the inauguration of the temple. They decided to come and donate. And I wish I had that same excitement. So what does Hashem tell him? Hashem tells him yours is greater. In other words, maybe Aaron does not see himself as someone who has the same excitement as the leaders of the tribes, but what Aaron does have is consistency. Doing something every day is actually much deeper and much greater, right? So you have a person that when they decide to do something good, they do something with all the excitement and all the passion, and once a year they'll take you out for your birthday and buy you the best birthday present, right? And then you have someone else who every day does something small for you, but it's consistent. Okay, so what's greater? So the message of Rashi, at least according to some Hasidic interpretation, is that the message of Rashi is that the consistency that Aaron produces is greater than the excitement that happens once in a while from the leaders of the tribes. Of course, what's the relevance to us? We understand that every time we have to realize that the big change, when do people change? When are people transformed? So we like to think that we're transformed when we're very excited, we're very inspired, maybe on Yom Kippur or other, the birth of a child or whatever the case is, some very powerful and moving events. And it's true to a degree, but really what's happening is real change happens, real growth does not happen when there's one overwhelming experience, but it happens if a person could produce consistency, if a person could develop habits. And the whole idea of a habit is that you do it every day. And it might not have the same passion, but you do it every day. And if you do it every day, that creates the transformation. And I think that in some ways, it's just coming to me right now, but I think that it's fair to say that the entire Parsha is really a testament to this concept, because really what the entire Parsha is telling you It's telling you that Sinai was not the Jewish people being at Sinai was not able to transform the Jews. We'll see in a minute. They leave Sinai, and all the great spiritual qualities they attained at Sinai is poof, out the window. 5 minutes after Sinai, they're saying, we want meat, we want steak. What happened here? How do you move from people who stood at Sinai and heard God speak and experienced the greatest divine revelation to people who are looking around, looking for a good burger, right? How do you transform? So how do they fall so low? So the answer probably is this is human nature. Human nature is that we're never transformed by one-time, overwhelming, exciting experiences. It's inspiring, it's enjoyable, it's a lot of fun, but that's not where the transformation happens. For the transformation to happen, you need time, and you need habit, and you need consistency, and perhaps that's why they stayed in the desert for 40 years. But that we'll talk about next week when we learn about how they stayed in the desert for 40 years. But this week we see clearly the shortcoming of Sinai. Sinai is not going to change you. I know Sinai is exciting. But Sinai is not going to change you, ladies and gentlemen. What will change you is lighting the menorah every day, twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. You're having a little bit of light, but it's consistent light, and that's where the transformation happens. And that's why God says that you, meaning Aaron's shear is greater than their shear, the shear of the priests, the shear of the leaders of the tribes, because they do so. They show up at the inauguration. It's exciting. Everyone's happy in the beginning. Everyone's happy at the wedding. You're going to smile at your bride at the wedding, but the question is, are you going to smile at her every morning? And that's a different question. And that's a question of consistency versus the exciting events. So that is one point in the beginning of the parsha, but I felt it's important to say it because it also explains the mind frame of the rest of the parsha as well. Okay, so that's point one. If anybody wants to make a little comment or a big comment, whatever you want, if anyone wants to jump in, wonderful. Otherwise, we will continue. Okay, one more point. I just want to make the point. It's not one more point. It's just that it's good to know. Some things are good to know. You come take the class. You want to hear what I have to say, but you also want to get a flavor of what the classic commentators are saying. And this is a famous commentary of Nachman, of Ramban, Nachmanides. So I want to say it just because it's good to know. This is like a famous piece of Nachmanides. So you want to know it. Says Nachmanides. Nachmanides asks a question. Aaron does many different services in the temple. He offers the offerings. He lights the menorah. He offers the incense. He does anything. All the priests do everything. So now, if Rashi tells us, quoting the Medrash, that Aaron was sad that he did not participate in the gifts of the inauguration of the altar and the temple, and therefore Hashem comforts him and tells him, "Don't worry, you light the menorah." The question is, why did he say you light the menorah? Why doesn't he tell him you offer the incense or you slaughter the offerings? There's so many other things that Aaron does. So why did God specifically choose the lighting of the menorah to comfort Aaron? That's the question that Nachmanides asks. It's a famous question. You go to Borough Park or Crown Heights and stop someone on the street and say, what does Nachmanides ask on the opening phrase of this parsha? And they'll tell you, Lama nichamai, why did Hashem comfort him with the kindling of the candles and not with for example, offering the incense, which in some ways is more whole. So Nachmanides answers as follows. Nachmanides says that there's something unique about the candles, lighting the menorah. What's unique is lighting the menorah did not cease after the temple was destroyed. What do I mean? Even though there's no temple, so we don't light the menorah in the temple, but we do light the Hanukkah menorah. So in other words, every person has an experience which commemorates the lighting of the menorah. And that's when we light the Hanukkah menorah every year. So in some sense, says Nachmanides, that when God tells Aaron, I'm going to comfort you with something that's unique, he says the comfort is that I'm comforting you with the menorah, lighting the menorah, and those candles will never be nullified. Those candles will never be nullified, because even when the temple is destroyed, but the fact that the Jewish people will light candles, that continues, and we do so with the lighting of the menorah, of the Hanukkah menorah. So that's just good to know. Of course, the Hasidic masters are all over this. They love this idea, because the idea, what's Hanukkah? Hanukkah menorah is the idea. It used to be that when there's a temple, you light the menorah in the temple. But Hanukkah menorah is the ability of every Jew to light a little bit of light in their own home. In some ways, that's more profound than the light of the temple. And that's, without getting too poetic, that's similar to what we said before. You have the overarching, inspiring experience of being in the temple, but then the true transformation comes if you can go home and light a little bit of light in your house, right? That's where the world is really transformed. So this candle, it's very easy to overlook its power, because it's not as exciting as being in the temple. It's not as exciting as Sinai, but it's more transformative because it's consistent, it's habit, and it's a little bit of light, but you do it every day in your home, every year on Hanukkah, but maybe also every Friday night. So that is the introduction of the parsha. Now we could move to the excitement. Okay, fine. That's the menorah. All the Hasidic, like I said, I'm a student. I guess I'm a Hasidic Jew, I should say. So I have to talk about the beginning of the parsha, because all the Hasidic masters love this idea, lighting the menorah. Just the metaphors, they can't stop. Oh, so I'll say one more thing. I just can't. I can't resist. There's this interesting interesting word. What does Behalasocha mean? Literally, Behalasocha means when you raise, when you lift up. So the name of the parsha is Behalasocha Tanerot. When you lift up the flame, that is the phrase the Torah uses to light the candles. When you lift up the flame. Now it's very strange. It's a very strange expression to talk about lighting candles as lifting up candles. Right? Lift up candles. You don't think of lifting candles. You think of kindling candles, lighting candles. What's lifting up candles? So there are two interpretations in Rashi. One interpretation is that if you ever try to light a candle, especially, let's say, an oil lamp, you sit there, you light your, if you have an oil menorah, you light your oil menorah. It takes time from when the wick catches fire until the fire goes up in a flame. And the lighter, the fire that's lighting the candle has to stick around. You have to stay there to help the fire go up on its own. So says Rashi, the reason why we employ the word Behalasocha, the reason why the Torah employs the word Behalasocha when you raise the fire is because it's telling Aaron, don't just light the candles and rush. Stay there. When you're lighting the candles, stay there until the candle's fire goes up on its own and it doesn't need to be relit. That's the first interpretation. What's the mystical message of this interpretation? The mystical message is if you're seeking to inspire somebody, if you're seeking to teach somebody, so you have to teach them to the point where they don't need you anymore. See, that's the problem. The problem is, I hope there's no therapists on the phone. I hope no one's going to watch this. But again, if I could perpetuate your problem, then it's good for business. If you have to keep coming back for more, I could keep billing you, right? What is the true inspiration? True inspiration is that I cure you to the point where you don't need me anymore. That's true inspiration. So sometimes, what's a guru? How do you know the guru is unhealthy? If the guru if you need the guru sets up a system where you need that person, you become dependent on the guru for inspiration, then you know that's not true inspiration. Why? Because the candle, you didn't go up, the candle that's being lit did not go up on its own. It's not independent. So God tells Aaron, your job is to light the menorah, light the fire. And we know that symbolically that refers to the Jewish souls. You have the menorah, which is the seven type of souls, and Aaron has to inspire the Jew. But the point is, can you inspire the Jew to the point where they don't need you anymore? So this is very difficult for parents to hear. But how do you know that your child, you did a good job educating your child? I hate to break your heart so early in the morning, but how do you know you did it? How do you know you did a good job educating your child? The answer is, of course, the answer is when they don't need you anymore. When they don't need you anymore, you know you did a good job. If they continuously need you, you may be a good parent, you may be very giving, you may be very loving, but you have not achieved your job of inspiring them to the point where they don't need you anymore. Okay, so that's what God is telling Aaron. We say when you raise the flame, because the point is you want to inspire them to the point where they don't need you. Point number one. And Rashi says there's another reason. Another reason why we use the point, and another reason why we use the word, why the Torah uses the word Behalasocha when you raise the fire, or when you lift up the fire for kindling fire. It's very strange. So the second interpretation of Rashi is that what says when you raise up the fire, it doesn't, when you lift up the fire, it doesn't mean you lift the fire. It means when you raise yourself up. And Rashi says that there was a little stool before the menorah, and Aaron would climb on the stool in order to light the menorah. That's what Rashi's second interpretation. That there was a little stool, and Aaron would go up on the stool, and when he would go up on the stool, he would light the menorah. And that's why it says, Behalasocha, when you go up the candles, not when you raise the candles, but when you raise yourself to light the candles. Okay, but you could imagine that the Hasidic commentaries absolutely love this interpretation. This is something that the Rebbe said many times, and I think he exemplified this in his life, and at least not in his teachings, what he taught us. The irony here is Aaron is lighting the candle, which is a metaphor for Aaron is inspiring somebody else. So what are we telling him? You think you're inspiring somebody else, but the truth is when you inspire someone else, you're actually raising yourself. You're actually climbing on the stool. You think you're inspiring somebody else, but in the process, you yourself are being inspired. You yourself are being elevated. So that's the two interpretations of why we use the term Behalasocha when you lift up. Either you have to lift up the other person to the point where they don't need you anymore. They're rising on their own, or that you should realize that the best way to find inspiration is to inspire somebody else. Because when you inspire somebody else, automatically you also go up. So now, not the candle is going up, but Aaron is going up. And of course, this is very important because I wake up this morning, and even though there's a wonderful breeze in Greenwich this morning, if you're outside the house, inside is a little humid because it's a little humid, the air is a little humid. But if like me, if you are outside, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, but there's no sun. If there's no sun, it's hard to get to inspire yourself. So if it's a time that it's hard to inspire, what's the best way of finding inspiration? The second interpretation of Rashi teaches us that the best way of finding inspiration is not trying to inspire yourself. Try to inspire somebody else. Try to help somebody else. Try to say good morning to somebody else. And the byproduct of reaching out to somebody else is that you yourself will be elevated, just like Aaron himself is elevated. And he literally is climbing the stool, but figuratively means he's going higher when he's trying to inspire somebody else. So enough on the lighting of the menorah, but that's for that. Now we'll continue to the rest of the parsha, to the stories. Oh, there's so much to say. Okay, I'm just going to run through some of the quick stories. The quick stories is that there's a story here with the second Passover. This is a year after the original Passover, and you can imagine the first anniversary of the Exodus was a big deal, and the people wanted everybody to offer the Passover's offering just like God has commanded. Every year on the 14th of Nisan, they would prepare the Passover offering and then eat it that night at the Seder. The problem was that there were Jewish people who were impure. They were impure because they came in contact with a dead person, and they were not able to offer the offering. And they were very upset, and they said, Lama nigara. They come to Moshe and say, Lama nigara, how could we miss out? How is it possible that we'll miss this great opportunity to observe the first Passover? So Moshe says, let me hear what God has to say. And in fact, God comes back and says, okay, there is a second chance. And the second chance is that whoever did not offer the offering on the first Passover has an opportunity 1 month later, the second Passover, to offer another offering. And we get the laws of the second Passover. We can talk about it at length. Maybe we'll get back to it later. But the key is, the takeaway from the story is, this is the place where you see in the Torah that the message of the second Passover is that there's a second chance, that if somebody did not have an opportunity to do a mitzvah and they want to correct it, God always gives a chance to correct it. So broadly speaking, this is the idea of teshuvah. This is the idea of repentance, the ability to correct that which seems to have passed. So again, why is this? What is this doing here? So it fits here in the chronological order, but I think it's also a preparation for the stories to come, because all the stories to come from here on in the book is pretty much all stories of sin. It's all stories of debacle. It's all stories of setback. So I think before the stories of the setback, we lay out the mitzvah, and we say that not to get discouraged by setback, because God always provides an opportunity. Pesach Sheni, a second Passover, God always provides the opportunity to correct it. So again, we're looking at the various laws, and we're trying to see that it's not just the random laws that fit in, but perhaps there's a message that connects, unites all these stories. And if this is true, then the story of the second Passover is sort of preparing us not to be completely discouraged by the stories to follow, because the positive element is that correction is always possible, second chance is always available, and that's why we hear that before the debacle, as the Talmud says, that Hashem always creates the cure before the illness. So before you experience the downfall, there is already the ability to correct that downfall and channel that downfall to greater growth and greater holiness. So now we have some of those stories, some of the laws. We talk about how the Jewish people would travel. Hashem tells Moshe to make trumpets, and when they would blow the trumpets, they would start traveling. And it describes how they're about to go. And finally, we hear, just to get the mindset of the Jews, Moshe's father-in-law is still with the Jews at this point. So Moshe tells his father-in-law, "Why don't you stay with us? We're about to go to Israel, and we'll give you, if you come with us, we'll give you a portion in the land of Israel." The father-in-law does not want to come. He says he doesn't want to go, and he doesn't want to go because he wants to go back to his people. Rashi says that is not a critique of Jethro. It's not a critique of Moshe's father-in-law, but in fact, the reason why he was going was he was going to go back to the people, to his native land, to Midian, and teach them about the Torah, teach them about the one God. So when he was going back, it wasn't that he was while he was physically left the Jewish people, but figuratively, he was very much connected. In fact, he was expanding the Jewish mission to the people of Midian, according to Rashi. But it's just interesting that they're about to go, and Moshe says, "If you come with us, we'll give you a portion in the land of Israel," meaning the entering Israel was imminent in their estimation. Of course, it changed. Now, if you look at the end of chapter 10, the last 3 verses of chapter 10, we read about a famous verse. We say this verse every time we open the ark to take out the Torah. The ark is right here behind me. When we open the ark, we take out the Torah. We say the song, "Vayhi b'nsoha Aaron," and it would be when the ark journeyed. And this comes from one of the oldest prayers. It's probably the oldest prayer in the prayer book. I just realized it's older than the Shema. The Shema starts in Deuteronomy. This is in the book of Numbers, 40 years before Moshe said the Shema. So this is a very old prayer, and the Jewish people said it literally when the ark would travel. When the ark would travel in the desert, they would say this, and then we do the same when we open up our ark. But these are the verses. When the ark would journey, Moses said, "Arise, Hashem, and let your foes be scattered. Let those who hate you flee from before you." And when it rested, he would say, "Reside tranquilly, O Hashem, among the myriad thousands of Israel." Okay, beautiful. So we have the story. We have they're about to go. We even have the song that Moshe would say when they would start traveling. So when you get to chapter 11, when you finish chapter 10 in the book of Numbers, everything sounds glorious. We're headed to Israel. We got the Torah. we had the second tablets as well. So we sinned and we got repentance. God forgave us. God told us to build a tabernacle. We built the tabernacle. God dwells amongst the Jewish people. We're ready to go to Israel, and everything is fine. And chapter 11, they go spiritually bankrupt, pun intended. So things just turn bad, and this is a testament to human nature. And hopefully, if we try to understand what's happening and how they fall so quickly, we will get some insight into our own life possibly as well. So, best way to do this, I think, is to read a few verses just to get the feel of how the people complained, and then how Moshe reacted. And this is very, very interesting because Moshe reacts very, what's the word I'm looking for? Moshe is very hurt. Moshe doesn't want the job anymore, and Moshe gives up. He tells God, I can't do this anymore, which is very strange because Moshe had very challenging sins, great sins, and Moshe experienced the Jewish people sinning in the past and also in the future. And nowhere did Moshe experience this breakdown. So we have to figure that one out. So I'm going to read a few verses just to give you the feeling, and then we'll see what we could make of this. So they're 3 days out of Sinai. That's all it takes. 3 days after they travel, and people are already complaining. So I'm just going to read chapter 11 in the book of Numbers. The people took to seeking complaints. It was evil in the ears of Hashem. And Hashem heard, and his wrath flared. And the fire of Hashem burnt against them, and it consumed at the edge of the camp. So people complained. They sought to complain. God punished some people. The fire burnt means that some of the people died. Okay. Now, next, so the people cry out to Moses. Moses prayed to Hashem, and the fire died down. He named the place Tav-Be'erah, for the fire of Hashem burnt against them. So the people leave Sinai. The first thing they do is they complain. People die. Moshe prays to God. The plague ceases. Now comes the trouble again. The rabble that was among them cultivated a craving. And the children of Israel also wept once more and said, who will feed us meat? Who will feed us meat? We need meat. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge, the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. The menu in Egypt was amazing. But now our life is parched. There is nothing. We have nothing to anticipate but the manna. In other words, the people are eating the manna. Manna is whatever the bread that fell from heaven. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it was the same thing every day. And people need variety. People need excitement. So the people are saying, we are the lemons, we are the leeks, we are the goodies that we had in Egypt. And also, of course, mi'achlenu basar, who will give us meat? We want meat. Now we have the verse interjects an advertisement for the manna, tell you how the manna was so good, and to tell you that it's surprising that the people complain like this. So here we read verse 7. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its color was like the color of the bedolach. The people would stroll and gather it and grind it in a mill or pound it in a mortar and cook it in a pot or make it into cakes. And it tasted like the taste of dough kneaded with oil. Dough kneaded with oil. That was like unusual. That was like having a donut. Imagine you can have a donut every day. Amazing. Where the dew descended upon the camp at night, the manna would descend upon it. Okay, so the people complain. They say, we're parched, we have nothing to do, we're dried up. All we have is manna. Where are the leeks? Where are the melons? Where are the cucumbers? Where is the meat? What are we? We want the meat. Moshe is very upset. Moses heard the people weeping in their family groups, each one at the entrance of his tent, and the wrath of Hashem flared greatly in the eyes of Moses. It was bad. Moses said to Hashem, why have you done evil to your servant? Why have I not found favor in your eyes, that you placed the burden of this entire people upon me? Did I conceive this entire people? Or did I give birth to it, that you say to me, carry it in your bosom, as a nurse carries a suckling? Am I the mother who have to take care of this child? To the land that you swore to your forefathers? Where shall I get meat to give to this entire people when they weep to me, saying, give us meat that we may eat? I alone cannot carry this entire nation, for it is too heavy for me. And if this is how you deal with me, then kill me now, if I have found favor in your eyes, and let me not see their evil. And then the end of the story is that Moshe says, God tells Moshe, okay, you can't do it alone, fine, we'll get you 70 helpers, gather 70 people from the elders of the Jews, and I'll place some of the spirit that's upon you and place it upon them, and that's what you have. People start, there are other prophets, and then God brings the meat, and then some of the people eating the meat are punished, but that's another story, so we'll get to the meat in a minute. We'll get to the meat soon. But that's the story. So we have a lot of components here that are surprising. Number one, how the people have a spiritual descent so quickly after they leave Sinai. That's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about is why Moshe reacted so negatively, and also why is it that at this event God tells Moshe, okay, you're going to have 70 helpers. It's not the biggest crisis that occurred in the Jewish people, to the people in the desert. The people serve the idols. They serve the golden calf. Later, they send the spies, and they don't want to go to Israel, and it's clear that they stay in the desert for 40 years. Then they rebel against Moses. None of these times does Moshe say, I can't do the job. None of these times does God suggest and Moshe accept that Moshe should get 70 elders. All of a sudden, at this crisis, first of all, Moshe loses himself. In other words, he says, kill me. I can't do this anymore. And second of all of a sudden, he needs helpers. Why does he need helpers? He was able to do his job alone, both before this event and after this event. So these are only a few of the strange components of this story. Okay, the story is the story. I don't have to give an explanation on the story. It's a Yiddish phrase that the teachers would always say. Young children have a developed imagination. So the teacher says a story. So the kid says, what if something else would have happened? Why? How come the person did this? Why didn't he do something else? Kids are always trying to change the story because they have a developed imagination. So the teacher would always say, if a ma'aseh frek minishkin kasha, you cannot ask a question on a story. This is the way it happened. You're asking me why it happened. It happened. Well, you can't ask a question of why something happened. So that's it. The class is over. This is the story. Why do people complain? I don't know. They complained, and that's it. Finished. Have a wonderful day. No, I'm kidding.
About the story.
I'm joking. Don't worry. Yes, yeah. Go ahead.
Becomes what's the meaning, and not what's the. You can't change the story, but you sure can change the interpretation of what.
So let's say, what's the interpretation? What's the lesson for us? But also with Moshe, we have to understand what's really happening. So I'm just going to try to give a few perspectives and a few details, and then try to address the overarching story. So here is a few details which is good to know. First of all, what's so bad? The people want some spices on their manna. They want the leeks. They want the melons. What's so terrible? So the rabbis teach us something interesting. The sages teach us something interesting. And this is good to know in general. And I learned this as a parent. The child comes home from school and they start complaining. Okay? Or maybe the same thing works for your spouse, but I'm not sure. I'll tread carefully. But certainly with your children, and maybe with yourself also. So your child comes home from school and starts complaining. The one thing you know for sure is what they're complaining about is not the issue. It's always something else. It's never the issue. They're complaining about this because it's a deeper problem. Same thing as with spouses. When you're upset, you tell your spouse, I'm upset because whatever. It's never that. There's always something deeper. You have to see what's deeper. And here, the sages understand this to mean as follows. They complain as follows. They say, verse 5, we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks and onions and garlic. So forget about the spices. They ate fish free of charge. Can somebody say anything more strange than that? They didn't eat anything in Egypt free of charge because they were slaves, so they worked. Nothing was free in Egypt. So what does it mean they say in chapter 11, verse 5, we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt for free. They say free of charge, but it's chinam, for free. They didn't eat anything for free. What's going on here? So the sages explain as follows. When they said free, it means free of the mitzvot. Free of mitzvot, meaning to say, in Egypt, whatever we ate, we did not have any moral obligation, any moral responsibility. We were free to do as we pleased. In other words, in our own life. Forget about what the Egyptians said, but afterward, in our own time, we had no moral obligation. Because now we left Egypt. So we were free people, but we're not free because we have the moral burden of keeping the Torah. So the sages understood that when the people say we got free fish, we got free sushi, it doesn't mean free sushi, we didn't have to work for the sushi. It means we got the sushi and there were no strings attached, spiritually speaking. And the same thing happens later. Later it says, actually earlier, if you look at verse 10, Moses heard the people weeping in their family groups. So this is the time when they're crying together as families. In verse 10, what does it mean they're crying together as families? Literally, it means boche, crying limishbechotav, to their families. Says Rashi, they're crying about family business, meaning to say they're crying about the laws of the Torah's laws of arayot, of prohibited marriages. So they're crying about the fact that they can't marry certain people. In other words, they're rejecting the moral code of the Torah. So when they come and say we want meat, it's not about the meat. It's a much broader problem. What they're rejecting is they're rejecting the teachings of the Torah. And that's why, and the fish is just an excuse. The meat is just an excuse. And that's perhaps why Moshe is so upset. And Moshe says, I'm giving up, because he realized that when the people are complaining, you can't just give them fish. There was a much bigger rejection of the message of the Torah. That's very, 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 very painful for Moshe. Of course, there's a Hasidic way of reading it. So if we stick around, I'm going to give you the Hasidic way of reading it, which elevates this to a different type of complaint. But I'm just giving you the basics so far. The basic psychology. The basic psychology is, why did Moshe go crazy? Moshe lost himself because he felt this was a rejection of the Torah. They want free food. What does free food mean? Free means without any moral burden. Don't tell me what to do in my own time. And the Torah, unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, does tell you what to do in your own free time. Does place moral burden upon the person. The question is if it's a burden or an opportunity. But that's one thing. That's one way of reading the story. Another way of reading the story is that what the Torah is trying to get here, and by contrasting the manna and the food in Egypt, there is no way you can spin the Jewish people's existence in Egypt as a positive one, right? It would be incredible to believe that somebody would actually say, "Oh, when we were in Egypt, it was better. When we were slaves in Egypt, it was better," right? And yet now we're free people and we have manna from the heaven. That's somehow worse than Egypt. So what does this tell us about human psychology? What that tells us is that how a person feels, whether a person is satisfied or not, has nothing to do with the external objective criteria. It has nothing to do with what you have. It's all perspective. If you want, you could say Egypt was wonderful. If you could want, you could say the manna is terrible. It has nothing to do with objective criteria. It's always how you feel, how happy you are is completely subjective, completely up to you. It's in your hands. Only I decide if I paint Egypt as positive and the manna as negative. In other words, we're telling you the human condition. The human condition is, you would say it's impossible for someone to miss Egypt. Say, no, it's not impossible, because how we respond, how we remember things, what we yearn for, how unhappy we are now is all a product of our own mind. It's all up to us. And the good news is, so this is a negative story, but the good news is that we can cultivate a positive outlook regardless of the circumstances. Because how I respond to my circumstances, how I respond to my environment is completely in my control. I don't always control all the factors within my environment, but I always control how I will react to them. And that's part of the lesson of the story. Okay, so now let's go back to Moshe's response. So if you read the story in a negative sense, and in a minute I'm going to come back and give you the positive perspective, but if you read the story in the negative sense, why does Moshe respond so negatively? So there's a very famous Hasidic commentary, not Chabad, but it's a Hasidic commentary, and it says as follows. It says, Moshe has no problem with Jewish people serving the idols. In other words, of course, it's a sin, but it's a sin Moshe can handle that. Why? Because ultimately, serving idols is a quest for spirituality. People seeking to serve God. Okay, so they found the wrong God. Well, it's not so hard. All you have to do is shift their perspective. Teach them that, explain to them that the God that they're serving is a false God, and that they should serve the one God, and the people then will be healed. In other words, it's a spiritual problem. Spiritual problems Moshe can handle. The problem is, if you come to Moshe and you want meat, Moshe cannot talk to you because meat means nothing to Moshe. So what's the greater sin? Of course, it's a greater sin to serve idols than to want meat. Okay, but what does Moshe feel? Moshe feels, I have no common language with somebody who wants materialism, because Moshe is not materialistic. Moshe is completely spiritual. So for Moshe, the worst sin was not that they served idols, they looked for God in the wrong place, because serving idols is also a form of seeking spirituality. Moshe, you want meat? Moshe says, I can't help you people. And that's that interpretation to explain why Moshe responds so negatively, not because they rejected all of the Torah, that was option one, but option two is because simply Moshe is too spiritual to communicate with people who are looking for the meat.
Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
In chapter 14, at the end, it says, let me not see my evil. Is that mistranslation, or Moshe indeed feels responsible?
It's not a mistranslation. Moshe says, if you're going to do this, so it's chapter 11, verse 15. He says, and if this is how you deal with me, then kill me now if I have found favor in your eyes, and let me not see my evil. What's my evil? There's different ways to read it depending on how you read the story, but the simple way is saying that it's literally my bad. It doesn't mean Moshe did something wrong, but it means Moshe is very much connected to the people. So when the people descend to a low spiritual plane, Moshe feels that evil, that bad, is affecting him as well. He's not detached from the people. He's not emotionally detached. Sometimes you have a leader, if someone checks out, okay, it doesn't bother him, right? But Moshe is very much connected to the people, even in this state. And therefore, Moshe considers it his bad. Okay, let's look at the solution here. What's the solution? What's really happening here? So the first thing I alluded to earlier, I'll say it again, is that part of the takeaway of the story is that Sinai is not going to change you. If you are at Sinai for a year and you had an overwhelming experience and there was inspiration that came from above, it's not going to change you. You're still going to be human. You're still going to want meat. Okay? What will help somebody become more spiritual? Not necessarily Sinai, but consistent transformation, positive spiritual habits, every day trying to improve oneself. But Sinai is not the solution. So the big shock is, how could the people after Sinai still have a deep desire to meet? It's only a shock because we picture that Sinai will change you. But in reality, it should not be a surprise at all. In reality, this could have been anticipated. So that's important for us to know. It's important for us to know because when a person has an inspiring experience or a person feels excited or feels inspired, it's not going to last. It's only going to last if I create positive spiritual habits and make that part of my life. That will cause the transformation. So therefore, the first thing is, this is not surprising. That's important to know. Second thing is, what is God? Moshe, it's very funny. In this story, usually God gets upset that Moshe calms him down. Here the roles reverse. Moshe is very upset, and God basically says, take it easy. I have other people. We're going to have other people. You're going to have helpers, and those other people are going to help you and get the people meat, and you won't have to carry the burden on your own. What is God really telling Moshe? So a positive way of reading the story is that Moshe is looking at the people. And Moshe feels like Vicky says, Moshe sees my evil. Why is it my evil? Moshe feels like a failure. Why does he feel like a failure? Because Moshe is involved in revelation. Moshe wants the Torah. Moshe is experiencing prophecy. And there are hundreds of thousands of people there. And Moshe thinks everybody is on the same boat as he is. In other words, Moshe thinks everybody, we're all together in this. Everybody also wants what Moshe wants. And after a year, Moshe turns around and sees he's alone. He's the only guy. There's nobody else interested in prophecy. There's nobody else interested in revelation. Everybody else, what they want is just meat. So that's the problem. That's why Moshe feels lonely. What's the solution? God tells him, take it easy. Because even if not everybody's on the level of Moshe, but nevertheless, the people are not completely disconnected from Moshe. The people do seek spirituality as well. In other words, just because they want meat, it doesn't mean they don't want to be prophets. And that's why here, God says, no, you have 70 people that will help you. Meaning to say, you're not the only prophets. And in this case, if Moshe is not the only prophet, he's happy. Now we get to another story, which I didn't discuss yet, but it's important I'm just going to bring it in here very quickly. There's a story where there are 70 prophets, and then there's another 2. And the other 2 prophets are prophesying. And it's a strange story. The story is that Moshe's helper runs to Moshe and says, we have a problem. You appointed 70 prophets, and there's another 2 people prophesying, and put them in prison, right? No prophet wants to have competition. So Moshe has 70 prophets, and then there's another 2 that are prophesying sort of without permission. They're outside the camp. Put them in prison. What does Moshe respond? So it's a relatively, it's an interesting verse. Some people know the verse. Moshe responds and says as follows. Moshe says, let's see Joshua's response. So I'm looking at chapter 11, verse 28. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of Moses since his youth, spoke up and said, my Lord Moses, incarcerate them, because his Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. So Joshua says, incarcerate them. Moses said to him, to Joshua, are you being zealous for my sake? Would that the entire people of Hashem could be prophets, if Hashem would but place his spirit upon them. Not a great translation. Mi yitain, I wish all the people will be prophets. I wish Hashem would put his spirit on all the people. Okay? What's happening here? What's happening here is as follows. Moshe, what does Moshe want? Moshe wants everyone to be prophets. Moshe sees everybody wants meat. He's like, okay, we're not going to get prophecy here. In other words, we are not talking about spiritual seekers. He feels very lonely. I'm the only person who's seeking spirituality. Everybody else wants meat. And God says it's not true. There's complexity. Not everybody's on the level of Moshe. But just because people have a physical desire, it doesn't mean that they don't want to experience prophecy to some degree, even on the lesser degree of Moshe. And that's why the solution to Moshe, the way to explain to Moshe that there are people that are not on his level, and yet they can experience prophecy, is appointing 70 other people. And then what happens is Moshe gets the message, and Moshe understands that truthfully, all the people could be prophets. Hashem could put his spirit upon all people. And even if they're not going to be on the level of Moshe, but nevertheless, they still have a relationship with prophecy, which is, prophecy means a relationship they want to connect to God. So in that sense, if you read the story collectively, Moshe is disappointed because he thinks everybody has been transformed by Sinai. He wakes up to the reality that people have not been totally transformed. People still want meat. People still want good food. He's completely broken. Why is he broken? Because he feels no one's getting the message. He's just been teaching Torah for a year. No, everyone's out to lunch. Literally, they want meat for lunch. Everyone's out for lunch. No one has been taking the message to heart. But the comfort is God says it's not so simple. There are people who are listening because there are degrees of prophecy, and not everybody's on the level of Moshe, but there are 70 prophets. And in some sense, all the people of God could be prophets. Not everybody can be a high priest, but everybody can be a prophet. Everybody could have some inspiration coming from above. And that's, in that sense, that's how Moshe is comforted. Moshe realizes he's not alone. So there's a lot to say about this parsha, but hopefully this is a little bit of food for thought. And it talks to us about the idea that how transformation occurs, and also how to evaluate ourselves. Sometimes we look at ourselves and we say, oh, all I want is meat. That's so depressing. That obviously means that all the Torah I studied and all the spirituality which I'm trying to cultivate is meaningless, because if it meant something, then I wouldn't want the meat. And maybe the story is telling us that no, when you want meat, all it's telling you is you're not Moshe. But it doesn't mean you're not a prophet. It doesn't mean you're not seeking to have the Spirit of God upon you. And that's one way of reading the story. There are other ways. There's more positive ways of reading the story. But this is at least one perspective. And if you want another perspective, see you next year on the parsha. In this parsha, hopefully there'll be a vaccine, and hopefully we can get together in person, and then we can really argue and debate. But until then, if anybody wants to share anything, please go ahead. Go ahead, Jill.
Yes, there's a correspondence between this story and the Jonah story. Here, Moses does not understand human nature, so he's really disappointed that they're so trivial, and he's so exalted. But on the other hand, you have Noah, who understands human nature and knows that these people, because they have been converted at that one moment, this is not going to last. And that's his argument. So
right.
Just would like a comment about that from you.
This is a comment about human experience. Human experience, it's not black and white. We're not good people or bad people. We're not physical or spiritual. We're complex. And Moshe is not complex, because Moshe is much more spiritual than the average person. Moshe is a class on himself. He's a completely spiritual person. He's the greatest prophet. So Moshe, when he sees the meat, it's a contradiction. In Moshe's perspective, desire for meat is a contradiction to prophecy. And what God is saying, God is not that really offended in this story, really. What God is saying is the desire for meat is not necessarily a contradiction to holiness. It just means you're human. Now it's up to you to channel that desire. And that's the Hasidic interpretation. I didn't want to say it here, but there's a Hasidic interpretation. Maybe we'll discuss it tomorrow when we do a Hasidic discourse at 10 o'clock. But the Hasidic interpretation is that when they want meat, they want a desire. They want to feel themselves. They want to feel. When you have a desire for something, then you can take that desire and channel it to God. Moshe doesn't feel any desire. Moshe feels humility. So the point is, there are different paths to God, and the fact that we have a desire for meat or a desire for other things, that does not mean we shouldn't. You say Moshe was disappointed, but sometimes we're disappointed at ourselves. And maybe part of the story is that we shouldn't be. Maybe part of the story is that we're human and it's a completely human emotion and we don't fight it. Maybe we channel it. And eating of the meat should also become a spiritual experience, should also be a positive experience, not just an animalistic experience. But we don't have to destroy the actual experience. Now, I'm giving this positive spin, and therefore Jonathan calls me out on it, and he says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Earlier it says God sent the fire, and also later God punished some of the people who were eating all the meats, because within the Jewish camp there's also variety, and some people, when it came to asking for the meat, they took too much meat. In other words, it talks about the people that God says, I'm giving you meat for a month. So what happens if God says, you're going to have meat for a month? You say, okay, so I have meat for a month, so I'm happy. But some people are just piling up piles of meat because they're afraid that they're not going to have enough for tomorrow. So in other words, the desire for meat could also become obsessive. And if it's obsessive, then it's destructive. And if it's destructive, it's dangerous, and therefore they're punished. So even within the story, there's a spectrum. In some people, the desire for meat, if taken to the extreme, is negative. And therefore, people who pursue the pleasure for meat, which is really a metaphor for all physical pleasures, if you pursue it and it's unchecked, it's going to be damaging. So yes, there's some room in the story for some people were punished. But that's only when you take this desire to the extreme, when it's unhealthy, when it's obsessive, when it becomes an addiction, right? And what's an addiction? An addiction is a physical pleasure which doesn't have to be negative, but if it becomes an addiction, then it becomes negative. So one person is eating meat and it's not an addiction, and the other person has an addiction. So that's what's happening here. Some people, they were too engaged in the process of pursuing the desire, while for other people, it was a healthy desire. It means you're not Moshe, but there's nothing wrong with that. It means you're human. And then eating the meat can actually intensify your love to God. Famous story in the Talmud, quoted in the Tanya, that there was Rabbah, who was a great sage, and they asked him a question in the synagogue, in the study hall, and he didn't know the answer, and he came back the next day, and he knew the answer. So they said, what have you been doing? You've been Googling the answer, you've been searching in the library for the answer, what have you been doing? He says, no, I ate a good piece of steak. I ate a good piece of turah, of an ox. I ate a piece of an ox. I ate a good piece of steak. And that opened my mind. I felt good. You feel good, you get the answer. So in other words, the meat does not have to be a contradiction to the service of God. It can actually enhance the service of God. But that's not the level of Moshe. Moshe is much more spiritual than that. So Moshe doesn't see how these two can coexist. And that's what Moshe is learning in this parsha, that there are 70 people that can be prophets, even if they're not on the level of Moshe. And eventually Moshe gets the point, everybody can be a prophet. Everybody can have the spirit of God, even the people who want the meat.
I have two questions.
Go ahead.
So one is, what does dad mean when we're saying Eldad and Medad? And the second question is, if it says specifically in the Torah what the man tasted like, why do the sages then say it tasted like whatever they wanted it to be?
Okay, you want to go into the manna? I need an hour for the manna. The manna was a substance that really didn't have much taste. And the Medrash says it tasted like anything. And then here it says it had a specific taste. So which one is right? That's the question that Elisa is asking. So there's many ways of answering this question, but one perspective is from the Kedushas Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. I hope Mark is still here, but I don't think he is. Mark is a fan of the Kedushas Levi. I don't think you're here, Mark. But the Kedushas Levi says as follows: What is the manna? Manna is just a substance. It doesn't really have a taste. What does it taste like? It tastes like whatever you project on it. What does it mean? It tastes like anything. If you say it tastes like everything, it means it tastes like nothing. If you say it tastes like everything, it means it tastes like nothing. So, for the wicked people, quote unquote, meaning the less spiritual you are, then what does it taste like? It only tastes like this physical food. You're eating the same thing every day. But if you're more spiritual, then it tastes like anything because you're not tied down to the substance. Every experience, you could project any taste you want onto this experience. And that's why for the righteous, there's variety. What does it mean, variety? I may be eating the same breakfast every day, but every day it's not the same breakfast. Every day it's a different experience because I'm not just focused on the physical, I'm focused on the entire experience. And I'm a different person, And therefore, the experience tastes differently every day. So if you want to think, what does the manna represent? The manna represents, so the simple answer, Elisa, is that the Medrash says that for the righteous can taste any taste in it, and the wicked only have one taste. For them, it tastes like dough and oil. So even the donut is a very good food, but if you eat a donut every day, it's not going to taste good. I think the manna was the donut without the calories. So, but the bottom line is, even a donut every day gets boring after a while. That's what the Medrash says. But what does the Medrash really mean? The Medrash means to say that what my life tastes like to me. Is my life boring? Okay, that depends on my perspective. The more spiritual I am, the more tastes and experience I project on my life, and the more rich my life is. But if I'm quote unquote wicked, but in this context, wicked means I'm not spiritual, I'm only focusing on the physical, what I have in my fridge, in my refrigerator, then my life is boring because I have the same bread every day. So in that sense, it's again part of the overarching theme that I mentioned earlier, which is my experience doesn't really depend on the objective circumstances of my experience. It depends on my perspective. So if I have a private jet, but I'm bored of my private jet, and the other guy doesn't have a private jet, it never goes on vacation, but every day life is exciting. What does it have to do? It has to do whether they're wicked or righteous. In this context, whether they're spiritual or physical. If you're physical, you're focused on the jet, the same jet, you get boring. Every year you need a new jet, right? That's something because you get bored of it. And that's natural if you're looking at the physical. But if you're a spiritual person, then every day is a new experience because you're looking beyond just the physical container, which even if the physical container stays the same, but the energy of the container changes. So I hope that at least makes a little bit of sense. But it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see, the Rebbe never went on vacation for how many years? At least from when he came to the United States, he left once to see his mother in France, to bring her here. 50 years, the man never took a day off. Literally not one day off. And he had the same schedule. He lived 50 years within a 2.5 block radius. So you say it's a very boring experience. Why? Because the physical surroundings are the same. Well, the point, what I'm trying to say is that yes, if you're just looking at the physical experience, the manna every day is the same. But on the other hand, if you're righteous, then the manna tastes like anything because it's not tied down to the physical. The experience depends on the energy you put into it.
Thank you. And how about the names? Is there a meaning to Eldad and Medad?
There has to be a meaning, Eldad and Medad. There has to be a meaning. I don't recall anything right offhand, but I'm sure there's a meaning. I'm sure we can look around and find something. If I do, I will, and you remind me, I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Rabbi, thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I don't know if you saw that I sent you an email. Did you see that?
Yeah. I saw the email. I have to do a little bit of research, but I'll get back to you. Hopefully we couldn't do it tomorrow or Sunday.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay.